Okay, all, we're going to get started here. Thanks for coming. I know this is a little echo from the computer here. My name is Byron. I'm the Relationship Director with Integrity Title. I like to try and get these little educational events set up with Mike and Amir and Tina's help, Mike's help from CMG, and Bernardo from Marvel Insurance. Everybody participating in the breakfast and the coffee in the classroom. I'm going to start at the end. We have Michael Heath, our attorney owner of Integrity Title, which we are a proud major sponsor. Up on the wall in the back there, you can see our banner. We have a QR code there. If you guys need a net sheet, please scan it. We have our operations manager, Tina Kendall. We have Amir and Mike Webb, your brokers. We're going to go ahead and start with Mike. And everybody online, you're going to be muted for the time being, but please put your questions in the chat.
It is being recorded. Okay. Most people tell me I don't need anything to amplify my voice.
Yeah, he's working on it.
We're getting there. We have quite a few people on Zoom.
Did everybody grab one of the handouts that's on the table back there so you can follow along on our talk track?
Yeah, so make sure you have a handout. We've got a couple of things in there that I think you're going to find interesting. One will certainly be housekeeping, and the other will be something we're going to talk about. As you see on the board here, I'm not going to get, this will be the last time I go over a history of what's happened and how we got here. I think there's a lot of people on Zoom that probably don't know that. We find people are waking up and saying, what lawsuit? What are you talking about? And those of you that are here today, you've already separated yourself from the pack by just being here. So we appreciate that. We've assembled a team, a transaction team, to help you guys understand this moving forward. I also know that everybody wants certainty in their life, and we darn sure want certainty around our paycheck. I get that, guys. I was an agent. I am an agent. I sold real estate for a long time. I'm an agent's broker. I promise you, I understand being in the trenches, supporting my family on commission only. So we don't take this light. We really don't. I'm going to give you a history of how we got here. So I think if we know where we're going, we got to know where we were, how we got here, what is it that they really want to implement. And I think by explaining this to you, it'll help you understand, have some trust and confidence in us that we are digging into this and have been for, if Rachel was here, I would tell you, 4 years. We have an agent in our office I've been talking to about this for 4 years. I didn't just wake up and go, oh my goodness, there's bad news. In 2019, the Department of Justice began investigating NAR. It was over commission sharing and the clear cooperation policy. They didn't like it. They subsequently came to some kind of settlement. I am not the attorney. We can always kick that to Michael here for clarification, but it really doesn't matter. They came to some kind of settlement agreement in 2020. We basically said, you stop doing this and you stop looking at us. But that was an investigation. Shortly thereafter, we had the Sitzer suit. Okay, that is the suit that in Missouri filed, took 4 years to come to fruition. NAR got listed. So all of you people in this room, by the way, were sued and found guilty by a jury of our peers. Every one of you, because you're members of NAR. You have not felt it in the pocketbook yet, like some of us have, because some of us weren't included in that settlement, but you guys were sued. The money will come, currently they're looking at about $1 billion they've collected to date from all the large brokerages and NAR. So some things are going to come out of that, and where you're feeling it is why you're here today. They said you have to be doing something wrong, so part of this settlement is we want all this money. The other part is you're going to have to change these practices, okay? That's why we're here today. Everybody started settling right around Easter. I remember talking to Amir. Amir and I watch this guys every single day. We're listening to people and talking to people, chief legal counsels for MLS councils in other states, the people that NAR, we're talking to people. You understand, we have affiliations with people in the business because of our sheer size. So the two parts of it, like I said, the punitive damages and then the practice change. All right. So what are the practice changes? They really want the decoupling of commissions all together. That's just how it is. We know that there's going to have to be a buyer's agreement. I'm going to let Amir and Michael at some point or talk to you about it a little later in the presentation. So when this happened, when the settlement came about and we saw some of the terms, it was either that day or the next day. Amir and I were on the telephone with our IT company in a Zoom meeting. We said, we need a website to offer our commissions on. We did that back 4 months ago. So when we see these stuff coming across social media that, oh my gosh, an office out in Arizona has a website that they're offering their commissions on, we could have that up for you in 24 hours. I could also subject you to being sued for antitrust violations. Okay, we're not jumping on things and doing things until we know that you guys are protected, safe, secure. They use you, by the way, to get to us. Okay, they want to get to us. You don't have any errors and omissions that will pay for an antitrust violation. I won't talk about it here on the microphone. If you'd like to meet me after the meeting and ask me what our monthly legal fees look like defending this stuff, I'll share that with you. And on top of that, we have to pay an attorney a lot of money to negotiate with another attorney to pay a lot of money. That's what we're doing. That's what we have been focused on, or we haven't been focused on, what the attorney's been focused on, but we got to put this behind us. When that settlement came in, and when the jury verdict came in, it wasn't check. It wasn't, I got your queen. It was checkmate. And we knew that. We knew, everybody knew, the only option was to settle, to abide by the terms that they're putting out, pay the money, pay the blood money, whatever you want to call it, and to settle. The only way we could move forward as an industry without this threat of civil lawsuit for antitrust violations hanging over our head was to settle. And we did settle, and now we have to abide by these terms, which are not really as dramatic as we're all making them out to be. Okay, understand, this has been going on in commercial for a long time. We're gonna have you guys do stuff that we've told you not to do for 20 years. Now they say that's what you do. It's not that complicated. Instead of, you're not gonna, and we're gonna get into logistics, but you're not gonna go on the MLS and print out 3 properties, and if you one of them buy them, there's a pre-scripted amount that you're gonna get paid in there. That doesn't happen anymore. You're gonna have to put your commission in the contract. We're gonna talk about the logistics of it. I think why you guys are here is because you wanna know what to do on August 17th and how you're gonna do that, and the talk tracks and the language and the tools to use that. I want to talk to you quickly about why you're going to use the buyer's agreement. If you don't, listen, you should all be jumping in on your MLS town halls too, because that has nothing to do with us. You're going to need to know what they're telling you and what the field changes are and stuff. But if you go show a property one time and you get reported, and right now the settlement agreement has made the MLSs responsible for enforcing these buyer agreements. So it's going to be kind of, if we request one, you better get it to us quickly, or you're going to get a $500 fine, no questions asked, no warnings. The second time's a $2,500 fine. If you use a wrong compliant form, guess who gets that fine? That would be me, okay? That would be Charles Rutenberg Realty. That will be, you'll be terminated if we find you did it. There's just no reason not to do it. You got to use the form we tell you to use. It's legally compliant with the terms of the agreement to keep us from antitrust violations. You will also risk, at a third event, I've been told by the MLSs, you'll just be kicked right out of the board. They're not going to have anything to do with you. Understand, if you get kicked out of a board, you're not going to go join another board, right? They talk to each other. If you get kicked out of a board, you're out of business as far as MLS and being a realtor is. So it's really critical that we follow the rules. So let's talk about today. We've already gotten some forms from the multiple listing service, or I'm sorry, from Florida Realtors, that the day we got them, the next day, a couple of them were obsolete. So what we did was we put our own agreement together for you guys, a buyer's agreement. That's the number one thing we were heard you needed. Even Michael saw the new exclusive, I don't mean even Michael, I meant the attorney. He saw the exclusive buyer agreement, and I think he told people that you're gonna have a hard time getting that signed by somebody you just met. So we're trying to give you something simpler. We'll go over the logistics of it here in just a minute. But I wanna tell you what happened about a week ago. The Department of Justice decided to reopen that 2019 investigation. The appeal process has been done, and the courts have said, yeah, we're going to allow them to do that. What they're doing, and I'm going to use a big term here that I didn't know anything about, because I am certainly not a lawyer, they're issuing CIDs. Those are civil investigative demands. That's basically the DOJ's subpoenas. They're subpoenaing state associations and MLSs, and now they're looking at the forms. That's why we're doing our own forms. They don't want to see the continued commission sharing out there. We have simple ways to help you stay away from that. In fact, it's probably going to be easier than you ever thought. But there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. I don't 100% know what the winner looks like, but I'm crystal clear on what the loser looks like. The losers are people that are trying to find ways to do the business the old way. It's not going to work. Now, understand, I've been saying this now for 6-7 months. If this is business as usual, and this is a complete overhaul of our industry, I think we're about right here. We had a little pivot in how we're going to record and document and request we get paid. That's really it, guys. That's really it. I say that in a small way, and you're all looking at me, that's my commission you're talking about. So don't talk about it cavalier. That's why we're going to have these weekly workshops. We're going to be doing Wednesday broker updates with you. We have been doing them. If we have new information, that's where we get it out to you. Jump on them. We are having Marcia. Is Marcia in the house? Hey, Marcia. Marcia has been killing it now for months. The buyer broker class. Yes. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you. You guys have a professional broker trainer in the house at your disposal. Take advantage of that. We are, she doesn't do it for free, but we get a great value by having Marcia. It's almost free, isn't it, Marcia? It's close to it. Yeah.
So, Marcia, I don't know. Is it on? Marcia and Byron are going to be putting together some in-house workshops in the CRR classroom twice a month to they're going to be workshops, kind of small groups, maybe 12 to 15 people. I guess Marcia and Byron will kind of let you know what those are, and they'll let you know what the dates are. But it's going to almost be like a little bit of one-on-one. This is how we're going to fill out this form, and this is how we're going to proceed this way. And they're going to give you both the real estate side of it as well as the title side of it, because a lot of the things that are going to be changing for you guys as title, we're going to need to know those. So keep a lookout for those on the calendar. It'd be really great for you guys to attend those. Like I said, twice a month. If they have to repeat the same class the next month, they'll do it. So keep an eye out for those.
All right, I'll try this. Hello. All right. I'm not real good with technology, guys. That's a joke. So the last thing at what's happening with the DOJ and what's going on. Do you guys remember, I talk to agents all the time. I say, you remember when you were in class? I have a weird memory. I remember specific things from my specific instructor 100 years ago when I took that class. But you remember talking about steering? Remember that's a bad thing to do? My understanding steering had to do with protected classes, had to do with stuff like that. Like I thought these type of people should live over here and stuff like that. That's not the Department's Justice's idea of steering. They are convinced that we are steering buyers to properties that have the highest commission. They are deadly serious about stopping what they call steering. So don't get confused when you hear steering. That is why it is critical that we are going to work forward in the way that. So what happened was the DOJ opened this investigation back up because they got wind of the industry and all of our fancy language and testing how we were going to circumvent the spirit of the settlement, the intent of the settlement by, I'm just going to do this on my Google business page, or ABC brokerage over here is going to put up a website and they're going to list all their commissions on there. That is another form of steering in their mind. You're going to be able to go look at a property and go, yeah, I'm not going to show this buyer this property because they're not paying any commission on it. So guys, that's where we're at today. Now, what our job is to do is A, make sure you guys thrive and have an environment that you can be successful in. And that's our goal, and that's what we're going to do. Part of that is I have to try and anticipate, look around the corner, and with the advice of my executive team and everybody we're talking to, and John and Joanne Nestor, and all of the substantial contacts they bring to the table, as to how do I bring something out today that they might tell us tomorrow is wrong. So I'm trying to make sure that we get you guys operating and doing the business and requesting your commissions as if you're working with a buyer, and make sure you're not offering commissions if you're working with a seller. We have to do that in the right way, okay? And remember, when John Nestor founded this company, our motto is the standard of excellence. You do know that you're working for the biggest brokerage in the Tampa Bay market, okay? You hear a lot of people, they take a lot of shots at us out there. Oh, you're the pay nothing, get nothing brokerage. I beg to differ. I will put our transition team up against anybody in the marketplace, anybody in the state. I'll put our trainers. Marshall, if Steve Looper is on the call too. Steve is a trainer at Charles Rutenberg in Orlando that we get phenomenal feedback with that you guys can plug into. I'll put it up against anybody out there. And so understand, they're watching us. You guys are the ones that are going to affect the change by your business practices out there in the field, saying, this is how we do it. I suspect this agreement that you guys just got, that we wanted you to have a consumer-friendly buyer's agreement that you could get executed. You can lock them into it. If you show them a property and you work with them on that property, you have a right to get paid. But we also wanted to make it that they could terminate it. You could make it for one day. You could do whatever you want. There's nobody out there doing that. We're going to continue to work in the way that is setting the standard for the industry, and people will follow us instead of taking shots at us. So with that, we've got some other parts to talk about. What's going to happen tomorrow? All we know is next year, somewhere between 4.5 and 5 million properties are going to sell every year in this country. We know that. Agents are still going to be a critical part of the transaction. We know that. We know that there's a few people that go it alone. Maybe a few people, more people are going to try now because they've heard a buzz. You do realize the average person out there in the world, if your agents don't know about the suit, do you think the general public does? They don't know. It's your job to explain to them. I wouldn't take them into the deep end too much because they didn't know how we operated before. I would just let them know moving forward in the industry, this is what we have to do, and this is how we do it. We're going to give you those conversations. These transactions have been backed up a little bit the next couple of years. It looks to me like, and we have Linda in the house, looks to me like interest rates might start coming down. I know for a fact inventory is going up. We've been backlogged and not having the normal amount of transactions the last 2 years. Guess what? 2025 looks like a big year to me for transactions moving. Looks like you guys have made it through some tough years. 23 and 24 haven't been the best years ever as far as numbers. I think we're off about 30 to 40% somewhere industry-wide. So I'm going to kick it over to one of you guys to enlighten as well. Michael, you want to jump in on some of the language in the contract where maybe,
Sure. Well, this is, can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Michael Heath. I'm a real estate attorney here in St. Petersburg. Thank you for having me, everybody. I'm also an owner of the title company affiliated with Rutenberg. You know, this is going to be a change in our industry. I don't suspect it's going to affect how many transactions occur. I just think it's going to affect how we conduct our business. It is a fluid thing. And I think Michael really hit it on the head saying, you know, this is an evolving topic, and it's going to continue to change as we see how things go. We all know that our industry norm is who pays what transactions costs. It's pre-printed in these forms on what the seller pays and what the buyer pays. And I suspect we're going to continue to see it evolve, and it's going to start steering in a direction. I mean, we use these pre-printed forms for a reason because it keeps it simple for us on how we handle our transaction, what the custom is. I suspect, and Mike, you can chime in a little bit on this, that we're going to see something where the sellers are going to say, I'm hiring my listing agent for X, and I'm going to agree that I'm going to suggest that the buyers put a request for their concessions, a bucket of money that they're going to ask for, and that's going to start simplifying things. The downside about this, though, is that it's going to make it very transparent to the consumer, the buyer, on how their bucket of money is being spent. But the sales on this for the average agent, in my mind, is that you're hiring me as the learned professional to help you put together the best deal I can for you. If you went it alone, and we've all tried to do things, do-it-yourself projects, and then we realize we shouldn't have done it ourselves. So I think from the agent's perspective, they're going to be definitely wanting to be able to sell the fact that you're hiring me as your learned professional to help guide you on buying a property that's getting you a good deal. I'm making that argument to the listing agent why our offer should be accepted because it's based on the comps in the area. So, you know, those are the taglines I think that the agent's going to have to be using. But understand, even as today's class and that we're talking about these items, I fully suspect that we're going to see future modifications in what we're doing. And Mike and I were talking, you know, for example, on the contract portion of it, you know, on page 3 of the sales contract is where we currently have on a FAR bar as is, and is it the standard provision cost to be paid by seller, cost to be paid by other. I'm sure there might be somebody in this room, and certainly between this room and on Zoom, where somebody has been burnt by a credit for closing costs being snuck in on those lines for other. I suspect that that's going to be a critical spot for particularly to address how the commission bucket of money is going to be. Good, Byron, yes. At this point, too, I also suspect that there's going to be provisions added to these actual final contracts that are not out yet. We do not have the provisions there that state that the title company is directed to be paying the commission to the buyer's agent as applicable and the listing agent as applicable. But those lines are going to be really critical for until we get new forms for you as agents to be paying attention to that. By the way, as a personal practice preference, I never suggest stuff being put on those lines because it so easily is overlooked. I think it makes more sense to use the additional term space to be typing those types of fees. But this is going to be a work in progress, but it's going to be much more transparent to the consumer if the consumer cares. The consumer may very well not even care. They may just be realizing that this is part and parcel of their transaction. The seller says, put your compensation to the buyer's agent in the contract. The buyer agent already pre-signed an agreement with the buyer to say, I'm going to charge you 2.5% on whatever we put together. You put it on the contract, seller to give 2.5% concession to the buyer, and it's a wash then to the consumer on because the seller is paying that. But I think from the DOJ's perspective is now at least it's very transparent because now the seller sees exactly, the buyer and seller, particularly the buyer, sees what the agent is getting right on the face of the contract. But what Mike and I talked about too, it may not happen exactly that way. It may be a variety of different variables depending on how this works. But in my mind, Mike, that's probably the simplest way of how, as agents, you should be handling this initially.
Yeah, and you know we've really looked at this from a number of ways. a lot of workarounds, a lot of everybody trying to really work hard to find a way to do it the way they've been doing it before, but to fit in, under the terms of the agreement. And as we've unfolded this, it makes absolutely no sense for you to get paid from another broker or for us to pay another broker. If Amir is my agent and I'm the seller and Tina is the buyer's agent, why do I have to give Amir the money to give to Tina? Why don't I just pay Tina direct myself? That's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. It's just having the seller directly pay. There's a number of reasons you do this other than keeping yourself antitrust free. This is what the DOJ wants. They don't want the brokers sharing commissions. Understand, 95% of the people out there may still continue to do it that way. So also, when these agreement terms come in place, this is certainly something Michael could speak to more. I will give you a very surface level talk about it. We have an agreement, we have settlement. Now guess what? Attorneys will start testing what the courts interpret that language to mean. Does that make sense? And if you're the person they test it on, via Rutenberg, it's a bad day. It's a bad day. So you don't want any appearances of violating the Anti-Sherman Act. That's why we're just going to write your offer of compensation right into the contract. Amir's going to talk to you about this in a little bit. It's not going to be complicated. Instead of going to the MLS and looking what you're going to get paid if you show up and bring a buyer, you're just going to write it into the contract. That's all.
Because we've always been taught that commissions are never part of the
For 20 years, I told you. Don't you dare put, because you're not a party of the contract. But if you listen to what Michael just said on page 3 of the contract, because I had a question, and listen, those of you that do know me and those of you that are getting to know me, I know there's a couple people over here that know me pretty good. I'll tell you one thing, I'm a straight shooter, if nothing else. I am not selling today. I am not recruiting anybody today. And by the way, if there's anybody that's on the Zoom, I'm a little late for my disclaimer. If there's anybody on the Zoom or in the room that is not a Charles Rutenberg agent, we don't care what anybody charges for commissions because we're a transaction-based brokerage fee with the smallest transaction, by the way, of anybody. So we don't care. There's no antitrust behavior going on in any of our rooms. I promise you. I asked Michael and Tina, and again, even in their side of the industry, the lenders are going to have to sort stuff out, and everybody's going to have to sort things out. But if you do what Michael just told you on page 3, we're going to make sure that title won't even close the deal if you don't get paid. Did you guys catch that little nugget? I asked me and Tina.
Integrity title?
Yes, integrity title will not even close the deal if it's in there, and let's just say that the buyer got amnesia and directed the title company not to pay you out of that concession or whatnot on the contract. There's going to be 2 ways. I think it's much clearer to just talk about seller to pay Charles Rutenberg Realty X%, whatever your percent is. That's why we're the industry leader, is because we don't tell you guys how to do your business. We give you the freedom and the reign to do that as long as you're playing within the lines. You guys are going to give us the freedom and reign to keep you within the lines and not, man, I'm getting a lot of calls. Well, why did you do this on page 3 and line 2? We're working on it, guys. We didn't just willy-nilly. So you're going to do what Michael told you. You're going to build that right in on line 3. Tina's going to look at the contract and go, well, wait a minute, Mr. Seller, you can't get amnesia and forget about paying your agent, or I can't close this transaction because all the parties agreed to it. It's right here on page 12, and it's on, I guess you could put it in both places, couldn't you, Michael? I would put it on page 12 for spell it out. If you have X% going to seller's closing or buyer's closing costs, I would even say what it's for. That's what they want is transparency. It's for, loan origination fee and title services. X%. Y% paid to Charles Rutenberg Realty for buyer's agent. That simple enough? Is that direct? All right, you can all go home. We're done. Great job. Please.
Okay, so just to provide a little bit more detail on that. So there's basically, for the way I foresee it, is that there's 2 options. Seller agrees to pay Charles Rutenberg Realty for buyer's agent 2% of the purchase price for buyer's broker. That right there is very clear what that money is allocated for and eliminates, for your perspective, any disagreement between you and your buyers about where that money is going, okay? But there can also be the option of buyer that seller agrees to give buyer a 3% credit towards costs and fees, okay? A more general statement like that. The problem with doing that is then we're going to require from a title company side to see your agreement with your agent or with your buyer to know how much out of that is what's being paid by the seller, or should we be collecting additional fees from the buyer to offset any shortages. That route gets more complicated from us. I could see situations where both routes would be applicable. But if you go with just the simpler, seller agrees to pay the buyer's broker 3% for real estate commission, then you eliminate any disagreement with your buyer about how that 3% is being allocated.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, as we're going through, the contracts and best practices on how to structure the commission on page 12, that's, a key element. But we have a lot of things to do before we get to that point. And I think, from my aspect, I hear a lot of agents, just because they've never used a buyer brokerage agreement before, how are we going to do this? What is it? And what is the importance of it? It's really not a new thing in real estate. Many other states have a buyer brokerage agreement. It's your agreement. It's your contractual agreement between you and the buyer. It's putting you to work for the buyer. So when it comes down to it, it becomes very simple practice for you to have a conversation with a buyer about, this is an agreement between you as the buyer and myself and my brokerage. This puts my duties to you, your duties to me, how I'm getting paid, what I'm doing to get paid, and what that fee is, as well as a start and end date for this agreement. We want to make things as simple as possible for you. So, as Mike was mentioning, if a seller or a listing agent made a complaint to the MLS and said, I don't think Mike has a buyer brokerage agreement with his client, they're going to reach out to us, and we need to be able to furnish that right away. So I am actually in the process of working with SkySlope. If you all haven't worked with SkySlope before, it's a phenomenal transaction management company that's offered to you free through Stellar MLS. And we're going to make it so fluid. You go into SkySlope, there's going to be a button right there for buyer brokerage agreement. It'll take you right in, you fill it out, you send it to them to sign electronically, and then it'll come back to us and it'll be in a database. So if seller comes back and says, hey, I need a buyer brokerage agreement for Angela with this particular buyer, we're able to pull it right up and get it over, because it is important. You're going to need to have a copy of it in your database. We need to have a copy of it as well, because you're going to probably go through 10 buyer brokerage agreements with buyers before you have a contract. And I'm not going to say, this buyer that comes to you today, they might not buy for a year. They might not buy for, whatever that time period ends up being, but you have to have it for that very first showing. Now, the buyer brokerage agreement, you just have to have an agreement in writing, and that agreement in writing has to have a start and end date, has to have the amount of commission, has to have what you're going to do to obtain that commission, and of course, it has to have the legal disclaimer that commissions are negotiable. So as long as those 4 items are in there, it's pretty much a solid agreement. We are actually, Charles Rutenberg, we're providing you 2. The one from Florida Realtors will be in Rutenberg files, and then we also had our attorneys draft one that's a little bit more consumer friendly, simpler to read, it takes in consideration all of the needed items, if you will. So you're free to use either one of those, but bottom line, it's important to have those, so, yeah. It is not, the question was, are we required to go through SkySlope? No. Like I said, we're going to have the forms on Rutenberg files, but it's going to be more of a streamlined process if you use SkySlope. Because if we get the notification from Stellar, you're going to get it as well. We need to be able to provide it. And it's your fee or your fine if we don't have it. And like Mike said, it's 500 for the first time, 2,500 for the second time.
No, I would just tell them if they don't do the SkySlope, then you got to have file.
Yeah, and you know, to piggyback on that, if you're not going to use SkySlope, so we wouldn't be able to find it, then you will need to go in and create a file in Rutenberg Files so we can be able to find it. I know everybody's got a lot of angst when it's coming to this, but we all just need to remember to kind of take a step back, take a breath. Everything's going to work out. You know, these changes in the industry, they're happening. They're going to happen. It's coming. August 17th is coming. But as Michael said, y'all are here because you know something's going on and you're accepting the change that's happening. And now it's just about coming up with systems and practices that are going to work for your business. So
We're going to open up for questions later, but I do see if you have a pertinent question about what we're talking about, then jump up and speak very loud. We're not saying that. We're saying that if the MLS, if Stellar requests it because somebody has made a complaint, they're going to give us a short window to get that to them before they hash your fine out. So if you don't have it in this very nifty system that Amir has been working on with SkySlope, this is a unique Rutenberg thing. This is not a SkySlope formal thing they're working on with this. Then we're going to have it in Rutenberg files. We think it might be cumbersome for you guys to make a buyer file every single time you sign a buyer's agreement. But either way, get it to us so we can forward it to either on your behalf. Let's say you're out of pocket for the day and they haven't told us yet. Stellar's not real happy about this chore that's been levied upon them either. They're going to contact us too. If we have it, we can submit it for you guys. You know, go. Hank just saved a $500 fine because Amir sent his buyer broker agreement over to Stellar. All right, that's why we have to have them. Now, it's a policy in Rutenberg files. We don't want to get into too much laundry list of stuff today. It's a policy. Any contract has to be in our office within 48 hours. We have to have that. This is a contract. This is the equivalent of a listing agreement. This is a buyer's agreement. The third is a purchase contract. Those three things, whether everybody knows that or not, is a requirement that we have in our office within 48 hours. Yes, we extend some grace. Look, I see an agent smiling right now. She's like, yeah, we try not to be too judicious on this. But there was also an internet question or a Zoom question that came across that Byron showed me that said, what if the seller is offering a different amount than the buyer agreement? So you don't know. You've gotten a buyer's agreement executed. You got a buyer out there. And now you make a phone call. And we're going to talk about that phone call in a minute, too. You make a phone call to the other side. And the other agent tells you, oh, yeah, you know, my seller's got X% in there. One of two things can happen. If it's less than the buyer's agreement you have, well, you come back and tell your buyer. The buyer agreement addresses that, hey, they're paying X. You still owe me Y for a total of Z that we agreed to, right? You guys all following my letters here? Because I'm not using numbers ever in mixed company if we have any. So that's number one. Now, here's the catch. It can't be for more. That is one thing that was a burr under the DOJ saddle. They didn't like that the buyer didn't even realize that what the listing or the buyer's agent was getting. So if I sign an agreement with you to be your agent, and then I sign it for whatever percent, and more than that is being offered by the seller, you can't get it. You cannot take more. It is absolutely a procedural problem that they'll come after. Right here. Well, Michael and I just had that conversation about 2 minutes before the, or very similar conversation before the program started. Now, all these forms and everything, the great thing is when we put a form together for you, we can modify that form. I don't have to wait for Florida Realtors to come out and modify it, and Michael's already got some good ideas. So best practices will surface to the top, and we will get that figured out. Don't worry. We want you guys to have a tool that helps you. Yes, sir.
On this topic, I'll just make it simple. Once you have a buyer's broker agreement, can that be modified?
Absolutely. You can always take less. You're not going to change it up. You can take less.
We have X in there, the seller's offer Y, we can modify to Y.
Yeah, you're going to be able to listen, they have no problem with everybody taking, you know, a little cut in the deal. It's the other way they have a problem with, guys. A buyer can call you. So we're going to have that conversation. I would not personally. Well, let's just have the conversation since it's brought out. I would not. If on August 17th I get a phone call from, you know, a buyer's agent saying, hey, I want to go show your property at 123 Main Street. What do you have in it? Is the seller willing to pay a commission? I would say we have a list price and we have a net price, and my seller is very concerned about the net price, and he is open to any and all offers. Put it in your contract. I would not say, I'm not telling you that's antitrust. I'm telling you it's leaning towards that direction where I'm seeing things go. So as we know it today, that conversation would be okay. You want to chime in on that? Yeah, let's follow up on this. This is a very important question.
So
Okay, repeat the question.
the question was, if you're a listing agent and you get a phone call from a buyer's agent who asks you, is the seller offering any compensation? Your response should not, well, your response will be predicated on a couple things. But when you went on the listing agreement, you took the listing, you are there to sell yourself and say, this is my fee for marketing your home, and this is what I'm going to charge you. Fine. You should also plant the seed with that seller that, hey, the realities of today's market is that buyers are going to have to sign an agreement with their agent to show property, and they're going to have to sign an agreement where the buyer is paying their agent. Now, the reality of it is there's a lot of buyers out there who cannot afford to pay their agent. So we need to be prepared to receive offers where there's commission in the offer. And so it boils down to, when you get that question, you should respond with, as Mike was saying, I've spoken with my seller. They are, what's important to them is bottom line price. They also need, you know, a 30-day close, and they need a week rent back. I've made them aware of the current real estate market. They may accept anything out there, any request you have. So come at me with your strongest offer and put everything in your offer, is realistically how it should go. Because, you know, the current policy change states that you can share commission with another agent, with another brokerage. But as Mike was saying, as the DOJ is doing more and more investigating on it, that is likely going to become an antitrust issue. So we don't want to, even though it may be okay today, tomorrow it might not be. And we don't want to be on that, walking that line at the moment. So.
Thanks. And one last thing with that. It makes complete sense to me. If I'm a listing agent, why would I tell you all my cards? Why am I playing poker with my cards up? It's ridiculous. Maybe I'm willing, and I'm going to use a number here. Maybe my seller is willing to pay 3%. Maybe you only want 2%. I didn't do my seller any favors if I just vomit right out there that, hey, we're willing to pay 3%. And you're like, whoo, it's my lucky day. Because my buyer's agreement, then you're going to scramble back and change your buyer's agreement, which I don't think is the way to go. That was that question over there. So as Byron pointed out, we need to make sure we repeat the questions because the people on Zoom can't hear the questions. So we'll make sure we do that. We're going to try to get the questions going here. We're going to take a little break here at about 11, I think, just for a quick bathroom break, and we'll be back. Quick, if you have existing listing agreements, you got to bring them in compliance by August 17th. This will do it. It's really simple. It's replacing paragraph 9. I wanted it bare basic bones. Listen, I know we have 11, well, no, we had 1,202 listings as of yesterday. That's a lot of work. We've got to have them modified, guys. The new listing agreement's coming out. I don't care what you use. You can use the new listing agreement, or you can bring your existing one into compliance with the addendum we put together. That's up to you. But by the 17th, if you have an existing listing that has not gone pending, you're going to have to modify that listing to be in compliance with the antitrust language. It's kind of ridiculous. One sentence got removed and one got added, I think is what it was. But that keeps us compliant. We got okay, you want to run that mic back there, or? Sure. Grab some coffee while you're down there. I'm okay. I'm okay. He's slapstick comedy.
So I believe my question will be to Michael, because I'm under contract right now on the seller side, and I do have in the offer this 0.5% additional charge that, I mean, it says towards buyer's closing costs. But then the agent told me that's basically she wants to get this money in the contract so he can pay her the difference of 0.5% because we're only offering 2.5 on the seller side. So do we need to change the wording in the contract?
I do not think you need to change the wording of the contract, if I understand your question correctly.
So it
Let
doesn't,
me repeat and make sure I understand. The seller already has a listing agreement. The seller already has a contract. The seller has an agreement to pay compensation to the agents. But in addition to that, the seller and buyer agreed to an additional 0.5% credit from the seller to the buyer. Is that correct?
yes, but it says towards closing costs. And I heard before that you said we have to know where exactly this money go. But she said that this is basically, she's asking for this money in the contract so she can get paid from the buyer.
So from a title company side of things, we would just simply say a credit from the seller to the buyer for 0.5%. I assume then that the buyer has their own agreement, buyer's broker has their own agreement with their buyer that says, somehow I'm going to end up with 3%. So then the buyer broker provides that.
Okay, so we don't need to change anything.
I
just
don't think you need to change anything because
you.
it's in addition to the compensation already being agreed to in the original listing agreement.
One thing I'm going to pipe in on that, because I think that's a contract that I just got. That's your contract? Okay, so we just got this contract yesterday. Title is going to need a copy of that buyer broker agreement that says you're going to get that 0.5% from the buyer, even though that concession is going to cover that. Yes?
Yes, that's correct. To make clear, there's two variables which is going to go under the additional terms. It could be that the contract reads that the seller will pay buyer's broker 3%, $250, $2,000, $20,000. I don't care what number you pick, but it can specifically say the seller agrees to pay at closing X amount to the buyer's broker for brokerage commission. That's one option. Option two may be a more general, seller agrees to give buyer a credit of $20,000, $200, 2%, whatever amount, as more of a general seller concession to buyer for costs, closing costs and fees. Then that's therefore just a bucket of money. We will show that conceptually on a closing statement, we will show that, which is very similar to your example, as a charge to the seller and just a general credit to the buyer. We don't know how that credit will get applied to the actual numbers. If, however, we see a contract that says seller agrees to pay buyer's broker $20,000, then it's not a credit from the seller to the buyer. It is a charge to the seller as a payment from the seller to the buyer's broker, if that makes sense. So there's two ways that that can happen. It could either be one as a term in the contract that tells the seller to pay the buyer's broker something, or something that just says the seller is going to give the buyer a bucket of money. How the buyer allocates that money is now up to the buyer. And that's why that buyer-broker agreement is so critical.
Will this be calculated as part of a concession towards the, yep. So like a seller's concession maximum, like just say if it's a 3% maximum on the loan, is this going to be part of that calculations for the buyer?
I suspect the answer will be, so the question is will this count towards what a lender will allow as part of a seller concession? And I think the answer is likely yes. And from what I've heard from mortgage, yeah, you want to chime in, Mike? Handle it.
So my name is Michael Cochran. Most of you, I gave the sheet. If you didn't get one, you definitely want one for this situation. So if you look on this sheet, for those of you that have it, to follow up with Michael, what Michael was saying, if you do a blanket credit and it's within the loan parameters of the situation, then it works perfectly. So let's use an example. FHA loan, you can do 6% concession. So as long as all the numbers that the buyer is receiving, the borrower in this case, is within those parameters, you're good. But let's say they're doing a conventional investment property, it only allows for 2%. So obviously there's probably more commission and credits in the deal than 2%, right? Hopefully. So in that case, you need to separate it. So when Michael said you can do either, right? You got to know on the loan side when you have to do separation and when you can keep it simple and just do a blanket credit.
I also think that this is a prime example when I tell people, did your loan officer look at how we wrote the contract up to make sure it's going to be okay? So very helpful for my purposes as well. Should we go ahead and take a break?
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and take a quick 5-10 minute top break and come back because we got a lot of stuff to go over for you guys and take your questions. 10 minutes.
The workshops, please keep an eye on the calendar for that. Marcia back there, Byron here. I think this is a really great way for you guys to kind of keep moving forward. Charles Rutenberg Realty, Integrity Title. We are going to be leaders in the industry of getting you through these next several months, et cetera, of all these changes. So make sure you do that. Keep an eye on that calendar.
All right, guys, in an effort to keep this moving on, we still have a ton of information to go over, but we also just quickly are realizing your questions are very valid and pertinent, and that's a great way to get the information out there. So this lady in the front row that's been with Charles Rutenberg since 2004, by the way, she just told me. I love it. I love when agents come in and they tell me their number at our office. I was like, 187, or I was agent 007. We hear that all the time back in the old days. Yeah, Bernardo, what number were you? Under 10, Bernardo. We have royalty in the house. Yeah. All right, so I want you to ask your question again. Now I'm going to put it right to you. She asked me this during the break, and I wanted to answer it for all of you.
So if a buyer calls you on your listing and wants you to show them the property, what kind of agreement do we have to have with that buyer, if any?
That's a great question. It's just the same as open houses. If Charles Rutenberg Realty has a listing agreement with a seller, you do not have to have anybody's permission or agreement signed to show that property. If you are working on behalf of the seller and the seller says run an open house, you don't have to have a line of people outside signing buyer's agreements. Now, the reason to have an open house is obviously to get buyers maybe sellers in the neighborhood, we know that, and to sell the property, but as we all know, the moment you show them another property, you better have a buyer's agreement with them. You show them a non-Rutenberg listing. So did that answer your question? We suspect when these listing agreements come out, there'll be something in there about an unrepresented buyer that the listing agent may represent. We'll address that when it comes out. Stay tuned. No, you're fine. You're a transaction broker. You're fine at today's point in time. Repeat the question. I'm sorry. What if?
And then you go under contract for that listing with that buyer, do you then need to get a buyer broker agreement?
You do not. You're still, at this time, practices are changing, but these are laws of agency questions. I suspect if this new listing agreement may have a portion in there that says, I get paid X for an unrepresented buyer coming to me. If you negotiate to get paid an additional fee representing an unrepresented buyer, then yes, you're going to get one of the buyer's agreements signed with them because title's going to need that as well. It's just, you can never CYA enough in this business, okay? People know that about me. I was trained this business by a very old school broker. I'm very old school. We used to have 4 copies, press hard, because there's 4 copies for the older people in the room that get that. We got a question in the back, Tina?
So if we are representing our own listing or Charles Rutenberg's listing, we still need to ask those people if they have signed something with like a buyer broker agreement, correct? We can't just assume that we're going to show them the house if they are already under agreement with somebody else to do that.
Most of these agreements say that it'll be terminated immediately. The prior agreement will be terminated immediately upon the buyer executing a new agreement, a new valid agreement. So if they execute your agreement, it'll terminate the prior agreement.
Correct, but until we know that, we can't execute another.
Well, if you execute the agreement, like back up on your, ask the question again.
So we get a call on our listing and somebody wants to come see it and we're allowed to show it without having a buyer's broker agreement.
Gotcha,
But
yeah.
at that point, we should probably ask them if they have signed something with someone else.
You
correct?
should, and let's just look at best practices here. These are great questions that'll be happening as we unfold on the fly. Wouldn't that be a great opportunity to go ahead and get them to sign your buyer's agreement? Hey, it's our policy. We only work with written agreements with people. Maybe it's only a one-day agreement, but if you want to come see this property, I need you to sign this. It might be a little overkill, but now you have an executed buyer's agreement and you're double protected, right? And if they execute that new agreement with you, yours will terminate theirs immediately. It'll neg it out.
Okay, so my question's a couple parts with the buyer brokerage agreement. So first off, you have a listing, somebody else does an open house for you. So now they're going to be required to have people, in order to come into the open house, sign.
Who's doing the open house for you? Let's pretend.
Another agent.
Another what kind of agent? Who would they work for?
Another Rutenberg agent.
Then why would they need, they're representing the seller. They don't have to have, they can run an open house.
Okay, perfect. And then second, when,
It's my listing.
right. I love it.
They're not yours.
That is true.
And I endorse all of y'all to work on my behalf.
The other question, again, with the BBA is that going to be a document that we are then required to submit with an offer? Like how some people say in order to submit an offer, you need to submit financing letter, but now are they going to have to say?
So I've been wrestling with that. I'm about to hand this over to Amir to finish the question off. I've been addressing that. Why wouldn't you?
Right, that's
I'd rather give you more information than you need. And I suspect Amir is going to talk to you guys about what he would submit with an offer.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it just it solidifies the fact that whatever you wrote into your offer as a commission, hey, the buyer really is responsible for this fee. And, we are requesting you to pay that. So I think it just solidifies it more or less. It's not a requirement, but I think it's a best practice. And, going along those same lines, of a best practice when you're dealing with, working with a buyer and whatnot, I would go ahead and have a kind of a one-page resume as well. Because if we get back into multiple offer situations or anything along those lines, and listing agents are looking at various offers that could also all be very similar, well, you want to separate yourself and say, show them that, hey, I'm an agent who knows what's going on. I'm an agent who closes deals. Now, whether that's you're showing a, listing like, hey, I've closed this, this, and this, I'm, easy to work with, things along those lines. I think that's, probably another added benefit if you put that into your, presentation. So.
Yes, I have a question in regards to my buyer is my daughter. What is the best way to write that BBA? If I'm, of course, I want to make a commission, but I don't want to hit her with it.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
My daughter is my buyer. I'm
Okay.
representing my daughter. She's my buyer. So, and I know I have to do a BBA for her.
Right.
So what is the best way? I have to put a certain percentage on there for my commission?
No, you don't have to put anything.
Okay.
You just have to have an agreement in writing, and if your fee is zero, then it's zero.
It's zero, and then I can pursue to get my commission from the seller.
No.
No.
Whatever you put into that buyer brokerage agreement,
Yeah.
you cannot accept more than that.
Okay, so that's my question. So
Okay.
basically, I need to put something on that agreement in order for me to go and pursue that commission from the seller.
That is correct. And then and you can always modify it afterwards.
If I
or
put zero, then I can go modify it.
No.
No?
No.
Modify it down.
Modify down, not up.
Got you. That's important.
Let's get, Marcia has a follow-up. I want Marcia to speak on that last question, please.
Getting my steps in today.
Okay, what I mentioned to Mike up there when he said, if you terminate a buyer's broker agreement, in the past, the old version, it was a unilateral termination. So that applied. The new BBA has a conditional termination. It looks more like a listing agreement. So I'm not really sure if just because they sign a new one with you, it kicks the old one out. I see more procuring cause issues possibly coming up. And there's an article I have that is in Florida Realtors, and it's procuring cause. Whose listing is it anyway? It's not necessarily who writes the offer, who takes the person over the threshold. There are like 6 factors that they look at, and it's really about the process. So this is an interesting thing. We don't have sellers looking to list their homes with 10 brokers to increase their chances of selling, right? But the buyers have been afforded the opportunity to run us around and enlist all of our services without commitment. Now this is saying to the buyer, you just have me if it's an exclusive BBA, or for this particular property or properties, maybe up to 2 or 3, with a showing agreement with these, you just have me. So it's a matter of educating our buyers. So I'm not sure what the right thing is. I just want to bring that up so y'all can speak to that.
Yeah, the agreements are saying, and part of the settlement language they like in there is that the buyer will enter into a written agreement to cancel that with a broker. We're either going to prepare you something very simple and have it in the dashboard, or I suspect we'll be getting one very soon. As you pointed out too, Marcia, it'd be great if we got that showing agreement. We are waiting on the showing agreement. That might be something for a more temporary type of solution running out. But don't get overwhelmed in the minutia. It just says right here, they have to enter into a written agreement to do that. So we don't want to make this too.
All right, one more thing.
I'll make it quick.
Yeah.
The thing is as a listing agent, we're like, what happens at the showing, right? The open house, right? So the first question you basically say after you greet them is, are you working with another realtor? And a lot of buyers don't want to get involved with you, and they may not, but they'll tell you yes. At that point, they're not engaging you for buyer services. So you don't need to worry about the BBA or a showing agreement. It's only when they say, actually, I don't, and I like you. So you might want to have a stack of showing agreements or EBBAs and maybe an assistant if we were in a different market like we were a couple years ago where you have a lot of people coming in and grab those buyers. but you're not responsible for written agreement until they ask you for the buyer services. Now, though, the conditional termination of the buyer's broker agreement looks a lot like the listing agreement. And I've been told, don't take a listing if it's withdrawn unconditionally, because you may do the work and not get paid. There may be a dispute, okay? So if you have a buyer's brokerage agreement where the conditional termination is how it's written now, it's not unilateral like it was before, you still may have procuring cause problems. So what I'd probably do is, if they don't know and they want to use me, I would say, all right, you can go ahead and sign this with me, and if it turns out that, you know, you have something already signed, I mean, we don't have many sellers that sign multiple listing agreements, but there have been some, right?
Yeah.
But we can deal with that. Then the brokers can talk about, oh, you know, conditional termination with one of them, okay? But not like it was before. They're not going to sign and then just send an email and say, sorry, I'm done with you, and then your BBA goes into effect. That's how I understood it.
Right.
And I didn't hear that up here, so that's why I questioned it.
Right, and again, we're a little gray, mostly black and white. We're working through this. We're going to keep you guys safe and protected, I promise you. The difference in what Marcia was saying, the only hiccup, so you'll understand, to try and break it down in simple terms like I understand, is that the provision says you can cancel it, but you have to have a written agreement. I think she's concerned that the agent said, okay, I let them out, I canceled, but I didn't do it a written agreement. So it makes a valid point, but I suspect if a buyer enters into multiple agreements, then it'll be on them to have the agent can find remedy in civil law to get compensated the way they need to. Hey, George, what do you got?
Well, I was just going back on her question about an open house and people showing up, and then the buyer's agreement over here says there's buyer's obligations, and we probably have to really point out to the buyers that they have obligations that they're agreeing on, that they have to disclose to owners and other agents that they are working with a realtor specifically when they meet with a realtor or a buyer or a seller.
Yeah, that's the stuff in that contract is there for a reason, and we didn't just grab stuff. It's to give you teeth to have it enforced should a buyer be doing things they shouldn't do. I can tell you for a fact, listing agreements are very much a slam dunk. If you take them to court, you get paid if you have to do that arena. This gentleman right here has had his hand up for some time, so let's get your question.
Two quick questions. Number one, on the buyer broker agreement. Number one, I have a buyer broker agreement hypothetically that expires on July 25th. I've shown them the property within the terms of that agreement. They want to sleep on it. 2 days later, we write a contract. Do I need to get a new buyer's broker agreement, or does this one still in effect? Does the question make sense?
Yes, you will need to get a new, or you'll need to do some type of modification to extend it.
The other question that I discussed with you.
Just before we go into that, but if you had the buyer brokerage agreement and it expired on the 25th, but you entered a contract on the 23rd, you don't need to extend it. It extends
Okay.
through.
Okay, the other question was, we've all had a buyer that falls in love with a house, and that's all they want, period. So I'm working with the buyer. I put commission X in the purchase agreement. We're dealing with the seller that no matter what purchase price is, they read about this stuff and they're not going to pay a buyer's commission, period. Even if we offer $50,000 over contract price. So the listing agent returns the contract, cancels out the buyer's commission. The buyer still wants to buy the property, but they don't want to pay me a commission. So they pursue. My question was, can the buyer legally buy the property without paying my commission and signing it into the contract? And what's my recourse?
I'll let Michael go ahead and jump on this, but from my standpoint, we can't hold up a deal. If the buyer and seller want to go ahead and sign that contract, they sign it. You have a buyer brokerage agreement signed with your buyer stating that they will pay you. Now, if the contract closes and the buyer is refusing to pay you, well, then you need to call Michael, and Michael will take it from there.
So I'm hoping we see an adjustment on the contract that says as a title company, we're obligated to pay any brokerage commission, if applicable, as part of the contractual pre-printed terms on the contract. So that's why I pointed out page 3. We have all these things that are to be paid, like, for example, buyer's attorney's fees. Not all buyers have attorney's fees. It's a pre-printed provision. If there's an attorney fee invoice we get for buyer's counsel, we can go back to and the buyer says, oh, I don't want to pay my lawyer at closing. I can look at the contract and say, well, contractually, you agreed to pay at closing your attorney. I'm hoping we'll see, or you could write in on the offer that you agree to pay at closing all applicable brokerage fees under additional terms. And because I could also see a situation where the buyer agreed to pay, 2% to the buyer's agent at closing, and then it's in the contract and the buyer says, well, I don't want to pay it anymore. Or it says a 2% closing cost credit, doesn't specify that it's the same 2% that you were charging the buyer's agent, but now the buyer says, oh, I don't want you to get all that money anymore. Okay, well, if it's in the contract that we have to pay any real estate commission as applicable, if you're owed it, we can go back to that buyer and say, hey, look, your contract says we have to pay it. Now, it is conceivably possible that a buyer and seller can agree to change their contract, remove that obligation of us as a title company to pay those expenses. And then, no, we do not have to pay, nor do we have an obligation, nor can we pay it at closing. But then that would default back to that buyer-broker agreement. Then you as a broker can go after your buyer directly. But if it's part of the contract that we have to pay it, then it gets around, then they can't squabble about it later. So when I gave the example of 2 different scenarios, one says a bucket of money, seller concession to buyer for costs and fees, that doesn't tell me where it gets allocated. I have to get a broker agreement, and but if it specifically says seller agrees to pay buyer's broker 2% towards brokerage commission, there's nothing for the buyer to agree to, because that is a line item charged to the seller directly to you, not a bucket of money credit that gets divvied up at closing on how that's allocated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just another reason why to have that specific language.
The specific would be better for the
Specific language, it's open and transparent. Plus, I just want to point out one thing. Great question. I've run that through my head as well, like what's going to happen if they get amnesia? That's a very funny disease that can come upon you at any given time when money's involved. Let's look, I didn't put this in there by accident on dispute resolution. Pertinent language. Plus, y'all do know this handles you for renters too. You got to have one for renters. We had one for both. Look under dispute resolution. There's a little thing called prevailing parties attorney's fees. I don't see how hard it would be to defend this unless you abandoned the client or something to enforce this. It's a pretty straightforward agreement. If you had to take this to a court, to a judge, to have this enforced, I think Michael would probably tell you any attorney would look at your agreement real quick that was representing the buyer that refused to pay you and say, be careful, we better settle this quickly, because if you lose, have any of y'all been to court lately? Have any of y'all had attorneys lately? I don't know any that you can even retain for less than 10 grand. And I can tell you that $10,000 retainer is usually gone before you get to the first mediation. And now they're ordering 2 mediations and then arbitrations and a lot of trations and a lot of depositions, a lot of things that end in ends. So I put that in there for a reason, guys. I want you to understand, we gave you an agreement that has teeth, okay? And it has teeth in the fact that a reasonable attorney would look at that from the defendant or from the buyer and say, I would go ahead and do what you agreed to do. You might only owe this agent $10,000, but by the time you get this in front of a judge, it'll be 6 figures. And that's not embellishing either. Yes, sir. Hold on. The Zoom people can't hear.
My question's basically on his. Say we can't come together on a deal. He's got the buyer, I'm the listing agent. My seller won't pay his commission. The buyer leaves him, comes to me, signs a new agreement that says 0 commission. Can I circumvent him and sell the property to them without a buyer's commission. I know it's not, I know what I'm saying, I know what you're saying, but can that happen? I know it's not ethical.
No, we bought the, you brought the property to their attention. You negotiated. They owe you a commission. And it has an agreement that has teeth to it. You may have to get it enforced. Maybe Michael will give you the first demand letter free. I don't know. Yeah, no, that's been happening since the beginning of real estate that I can remember, but you have an agreement. All I can do is arm you with a legal instrument that allows you to earn that commission and to receive that commission, and a tool that.
Well,
There's a fee. Let's call it a fee then.
he has a buyer's agreement with the buyer. If his buyer abandons him, comes to you to write the offer, that's fine. He's already shown him the property. He's already wrote an offer for it. Well, we're going to have to, look into that a little bit more. The conditional termination comes into play.
Yeah.
And, basically, he would be covered.
There's going to be a lot of these questions, though. Really good question. I want to quickly repeat this gentleman's question that came to me at break. I won't take the mic out to you unless you need to, because I wanted to answer it to everybody. And correct me here if I'm wrong, but he caught in the buyer's agreement that council already put a figure in there that you could get from the other side. Anybody catch that? 3%. A figure that you can get, that the seller's broker could offer you. You are free to modify that. It's in there because if we would have left a blank in there and you left it blank, that is open-ended, and we cannot have an open-ended agreement. There has to be a figure in there. That figure can be 0. Nope. Best question yet. That was the best answer I had. No, it cannot. No, I'm not being short with you, and that's not a Mike Webb rule. That is a antitrust settlement rule. Okay, I want you to understand that. I didn't make that up. I'm not trying to be a dictator. Yeah. Angela's question, I'm sorry. Okay, what was the question? Oh, can we use the language up to a certain percentage? No, that is not what they want. They want a specific amount in there. It can't be left open-ended, and that's considered open-ended. So, guys, a lot of this, I am not the DOJ. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a judge. I am just repeating to you what we've been told right now, and a lot of it's going to shake out later. We have a lot of questions going on in the back, but we also have one on Zoom that Amir is going to take.
One of the questions on Zoom is there a difference between a buyer brokerage agreement and a showing agreement? Plain and simple, yes. I mean, they're two separate forms. One's the buyer brokerage agreement. Obviously, we have a copy of that here, which we've put together, which has a lot of teeth into it, protects you. And the showing agreement has some teeth to it as well. But showing agreement is more for property specific. If you were just going to go and let's say let's go that route. Let's say you get a call from Realtor.com or Zillow. They want to see a property this afternoon. Great. If it's not your listing or not a Charles Rutenberg listing, you need to have a buyer brokerage agreement signed with them or an agreement. And for Zillow agents out there, Zillow's come out with this showing agreement. The showing agreement is not in compliance with the new policies. So that cannot be used. You would have to use this buyer brokerage agreement, a showing agreement, whatnot. Well, you start the conversation with the buyer. Are you working with anybody? No, they're not. Fine, great. You get their email address and all the contact information. And then you talk to them about what your services are and that you need to have a brokerage agreement in place before I can show you this property. And this person doesn't know you. You send them a copy of it. They can review it and ask you any questions they want about it, but they're still not feeling all warm and fuzzy about signing an agreement with you that locks them to your hip. So, you can do a couple things in this arena. You can either do the buyer brokerage agreement for one day. You could do it for just this property, or you can go and do the showing agreement, which, like I said, doesn't have as much teeth as the buyer brokerage agreement, and it's just property specific. The biggest thing with showing agreement is that there's usually not a cancellation fee stated in the showing agreement. So it basically states that I'm going to show you this property. These are my duties to you as a transaction broker. And if you buy this property, I am due X fee, which is stated in there. And it covers all the other language, it's got the start and end date, things along those lines, and for that property. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, thanks, Amir, for jumping in on that. It just brings us to a real quick point, too. We're not in the business of canceling listings. Now, we've gotten a lot of pushback about this. The market has changed. You took listings that were overpriced, bad thing to do. It doesn't ever do you a favor. And we're seeing these exorbitant cancellation fees. So we created a policy about, 30 days ago, 60 days ago. We don't want nothing more than $500 up to $1 million. If it's over $1 million, you can have $1,000. You have a $1,000 cancellation fee. There's also another sentence in that listing agreement that says you can be directly reimbursed for your out-of-pocket expenses. That's on addition to your cancellation fee. Charles Rutenberg Realty is not in the business of canceling listings and you taking an exorbitant amount to do that. We get the pushback from the community. They call us the brokers. So we're not doing that. We're also not going to do it with the buyer brokerage agreement. So if you put some big fat cancellation fee in there, we're going to be reasonable. We understand your time, but that's not the business we're in. We're in the business of helping buyers and sellers reach their real estate goals, not performing and gouging you on the way out the door. That's not what we're going to do. I want to be clear about that. Go, Byron.
Okay, a couple quick questions that are on here. Showing agreement, is there a showing agreement on the dashboard? Yes? Okay.
Yes, there is a showing agreement on the dashboard, as well as there is a compensation agreement. And that compensation agreement, just to be clear, that's so there's two of them that came out by Florida Realtors. One of them is compensation agreement seller to buyer broker, and the other one is listing broker to buyer broker. Now, both of them we're in there. We just took the one out. We took the one out that was listing broker to buyer broker, because as we talked earlier, that borderlines antitrust of sharing commissions. So the only commission agreement that would be in there is a seller to a buyer's broker.
And that's perfectly fine. But why take the extra step? Put it in the contract, right? Why take an extra step? Why say title company say, I never knew you had this, and different things? We want it in the contract. So what you got, Byron?
The buyer goes to an open house without their buyer rep who they have signed an agreement with. Are you saying that the realtor doing the open house can solicit them to sign a BBA with them, and then what's the point of getting a BBA?
I'm saying that risk has existed yesterday, the day before, last year, and forever. That never changes. You run the risk of sending your buyer to an open house and hoping that they don't get amnesia and want to go work with the new agent. That's the risk you take. What's happening today doesn't change that scenario one bit.
Bunch of other questions that relate to new homes being built and the builders paying portions of commissions, et cetera.
Yeah, builders are owners. That's great. Get all that you can. You're getting paid directly from the seller. Take it all. You got any more? How are the builders going to pay a bonus if they're offering a bonus? Well, I would probably know before I sent a buyer or registered a buyer to see this specific new home community. I would know what their compensation plan is, and I would have that in my buyer's agreement. Would you not? Instead of the days of just sending people, you're going to have to do a little more work as buyer's agents now, a little more prep work. But I would know. I would know that NAR is offering 3%, and if I get this under contract before the 31st, I get an additional $5,000. And I would have that all covered in my buyer's broker's agreement before I went and registered my client out there. That makes sense? I know, but the Zoom people need to get.
All right, so builders offering 3% plus 25,000 in bonus, or 2,500, whatever you want to call it. How we're going to change the buyer's broker agreement? Or
you're going to know what they're offering before you go register them, before you have your buyer broker sign that agreement is what I would do. I understand these best practices and stuff. You're looking at me like that's not how we've done it and how we do it. It's going to take a little more research on your part. We're not just showing up anymore and taking what they offered. You need to know what they're offering so you can put it in the buyer's broker's agreement to begin with, is what I would do. And I know that's not the perfect answer here for you, Bernardo, but
If you're showing resale first and then you go into the builder, you're kind of conflicted.
hopefully you have a really good assistant that's doing a lot of work for you back at home. Oh, you've got it, all right.
Yeah, I was kind of going back with the beginning when you said there's going to be winners and losers. The losers are going to be people, in essence, fighting for the status quo. So shouldn't we accept that the decoupling of commissions and the setting of the buyer's agent is pursuing the objective of creating competition? And so different buyers will set different commissions, different buyer's agents will set different commissions for the services they offer. And isn't that to unleash the competition? I mean, I'm asking the question, isn't that the goal? Isn't the goal to create greater competition in the market?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm understanding that right.
What's
One of the goals.
Yeah, one of the goals for transparency. But yeah, I mean, so you're saying.
When you said at the very beginning, you said there's going to be winners and losers, and the losers are going to be what I understood you to say. The losers are going to be people that are fighting to keep the status quo.
I get it, and I made that statement, and it was a broad statement about winners and losers as far as, this is a sober, candid conversation. There will be agents get out of the business. That's a sad fact. It's a great fact for you guys looking for referrals, because if they can't cut it anymore because they just didn't know how to negotiate their commission and the contract, yes, they're going to get out of the business. There's no doubt about it. Industry analysts have predicted up to 30% will exit the business. If I were everybody in this room, I would be doing jumping jacks. I used to go home and pray at night that the people that didn't need to be in this business would get out. Now I get into a place that we need body count, and that happened. But what I meant by the winners and losers, I meant you guys and how you're going to gather market share. That is going to be the loser agents. The agents that are not going to thrive in the new environment are the ones that are going to keep saying, this is how we did it before. This is how we used to do it. I am taking phone calls from agents telling me they're going to continue to do that. And well, you're going to continue to do that at another brokerage. You're not going to do it here. We can't do it. We cannot risk. Nobody in here wants to see the antitrust lawyers. I mean, they're like $1,000 an hour, guy. I'll just straight up talk with you. If you want an antitrust attorney, you don't want that stuff. So what I meant was the agents that are going to lose and lose market share are the ones that are consistently just stuck in yesterday, and this is how we used to do it. I don't want change. I get it. Nobody likes change. Nobody likes forced change. Nobody likes change. All we did was what we were told to do forever, and we got sued for that, okay? So nobody likes change that comes down about our money. It might be time for industry change for some people that can't embrace what's gonna happen. So that's what I meant. I hope I'm clearer about that. Okay, thank you. I know George has got a question.
So back to his point with the builder offering a compensation of 3%, just say you have that in your buyer broker agreement, but now it's going to be seen as a concession, but the builder is also paying closing costs. So what happens to that money if the buyer has a 5% down, it's hitting his 3% maximum, the builder's offering 3%, also paying some closing costs? What happens to that leftover money that cannot be used as concessions anymore? Is it just gone away? Or does the realtor who has the agreement there, that 3%, his 3% is just gone because that 3% is now used for concessions for closing costs?
I think it's a good question for Michael Cochran, maybe?
Is there any kind of
I'm coming.
on that? You know, if the builder's offering closing costs of 3%, you have a 5% down buyer, he doesn't have the money anyway, he needs that to close. Builder's also offering you 3% towards your commission. How do you get past that when the builder's already offering, you have your buyer agreement, but now you hit that limit?
Yeah, so there's a couple questions there. What Michael was talking about early in the conversation was separating it. So if you separate it, then it doesn't go into the bucket on the sheet. So that's part one. So in this scenario, you would definitely want to benefit from separating it. The second part of your question was if there's still leftover concessions. So we'll use some numbers. Say there's 4% that's being offered by the builder, and the sheet that you're looking at for that specific product says 3%. Well, you're capped. You lose 1% unless you restructure the deal and find a way to accommodate that extra percent. So if the buyer is putting money down, you can move some money around, adjust the loan amount, and so forth. There are some finagling that you can do and tweaking the contract to not lose that money, but you would have to structure it in a way, because you're basically what you're going to want to do is go back to the seller. One of the options could be is to get the price reduced to suck up that 1%. So you're going to have to restructure it, because you can't just ignore the fact that that rule exists in this scenario. So if the rule is 3%, the rule is 3%. There's no workaround. You're just going to have to restructure it to hopefully not lose that money. What we see on the lending side is a lot of times when you get a huge concession for a buyer is that nobody thought this through far enough along until the very end. And then the money, it's too late to absorb all that funds. So thinking this way in the beginning is going to be really helpful on these contracts.
So I think it's pretty important to, when you're structuring an offer, reach out to your lender. Talk to your lender. You know, you guys are a team. You're working for the same player here. So, you know, that way you can get it figured out ahead of time. So it's not at the end and then they're like, oh my gosh, we have this 1% or 2% that's going to end up going back to the seller if we can't use it. So I think it's important to partner with your lender up front.
Yes, yeah, yes.
Does the lender care if the seller pays the buyer's broker? So that's your workaround, as you see. So if the lender doesn't care if the seller pays the buyer's broker, you can include it in the bucket, or you can just make it a separate charge to the seller to pay the buyer's broker. If you make it a separate charge, then the lender doesn't care if the seller pays the buyer's broker. Pay the seller, because it's not, from a closing standpoint, from on the closing statement, it never made it over to the buyer's side. It's a charge to the seller paid directly to the buyer's broker, and it never affects how much money the buyer brings or adjusts in the whole transaction. The purchase price to buyer, yeah. Exactly. Yes, to repeat that if you wanted to get both, you would do one line under additional terms, seller agrees to pay buyer's broker X amount of dollars, then an additional line under additional terms, seller agrees to credit buyer 3% towards closing costs and prepaids. You would likely want to, so did they need to do an amendment in that case to say that they were being paid now by the seller? No, because it says, I believe the agreement says it's covered. It says if the seller pays it, then it's not an obligation of the buyer anymore.
All right, guys, this says we have one last question and we have to wrap it up because we only have the room technically till 12. But I got one last question that I know has been asked. It's kind of important online. So hold on real quick. Let me get her unmuted.
Marcia. Marcia had one thing. She really wants to talk about it.
I don't have time.
It has to be quick.
Okay. Okay, here's a sell to your buyer. If you list with me as a Charles Rutenberg agent, you do not have to pay a retainer. Okay? You may have to with another broker, but with me, Charles Rutenberg, you don't have that expense. Because guess what? Charles Rutenberg does not have an escrow account to hold retainers. Okay, so use it as a sell. That's all I want to say.
Kim, go ahead. You want to unmute?
I think more than a question, it's just kind of a blanket statement that I've gotten out of this whole thing is these buyers, and this is no offense to anybody here because I know you guys are amazing and you're trying to help work, navigate through this, but the buyer's broker agreement kind of sounds like it's a joke, to be honest. If I get my buyer, I sit down for an hour in a listing appointment. So now I'm going to do that with the buyers and get that signed. And they can just walk into an open house 2 days later and get a new one signed. Like, what is the point of all of this? Do you know what I mean? Like, I thought the whole point of these buyers broker agreements is because now these buyers can't run off and cheat on you, so to speak. But it sounds to me like from what you guys have been saying that you simply just sign a new one and it goes away.
It's protection in there for the people you've shown the property to. Yeah. So, did you get a copy? Did you get a copy of the one that we've?
Yeah, I like yours much. So
Okay.
Rutenberg.
Well, if you, Kim, if you like Florida Realtors better, you're more than welcome to use that or the showing agreement that we're waiting for them to come out for. We're just trying to give you guys the tools that are enforceable, that you can get signed, that was consumer friendly. It's not maybe perfect, but it was the best we could come up with under the terms and conditions that we understand and the rules that we're playing by right now.
Right.
If anybody who wants to have one drafted up by their attorneys, you can submit them to Amir and I, and we'll certainly look at implementing them in the future.
No, to be honest, I think yours is way better. I've tried to get one of these signed from somebody who was already under contract, already knows I'm getting paid by the sellers, knows me well, and still refused to sign it because the way the one.
So what I hear is you don't like the terms of the settlement agreement.
Well, nobody does. But the point, I just thought the buyer's broker agreement was a little.
We didn't enter into the, none of us in the room had any say of this.
I know
So
that.
we're all.
I was under the impression that the buyer's broker agreement was going to be more like a listing agreement that you can actually enforce. You can enforce a listing agreement. I have, and I've gotten paid, and you know that, Mike, because you helped me get paid on it.
I know, I remember.
And I did. So but you're basically telling us, so the brokers.
Yeah, we got to wrap up because we're running out of the room. Kim, thank you. I hope everybody continues to tune into these. We're going to do the best we thank you. We do have some closing thoughts. We want to let Michael, we're going to go down the, everybody give your final.
Well, I think this is going to be a fluid item. I suspect that over the course of time, we're going to get more instructions and see how this plays out more. So I would not worry too much other than we're going to keep working on it. And these things will get fine-tuned more as time progresses. And there likely will be more of a norm that's going to start developing as the market gets adjusted to these new rules. It all will work out. But thank you, by the way, for having us.
So we have a room here at Pro reserved every month from now until the end of the year. So check the calendar. I am sure that one of those will be for the contract when the contract is out. So we're going to continue to do this. We're going to continue to train. Charles Rutenberg Realty, Integrity Title are going to be partnering up to continue to train, continue to talk to you guys so that you are ready and able to go out there and know what you're talking about with all these changes.
And you all know how to reach us at the office. I mean, I talk to at least 100, 150 people a day. So, feel free to, you have questions, call the office. We're happy to, speak with you and what was that?
August 12th.
And August 12th will be our next in-person meeting at Pro, so.
1 second. You guys know that Amir is on the front lines. Nobody's seeing more than Amir sees. He is an expert. He's seeing the stuff that happens that week, that month. By the vast majority of calls he sees, he identifies He's helped hundreds of you. Thankful, Kim, thank you for saying how we fought for your commission. We do fight. We go to battle for you. God forbid you get sued. We have people getting sued all the time. We go to battle for you as well. I just want to summarize it with this, guys. I understand, again, the gravity of your paycheck, okay? I take this very seriously. And in all factual matter, I've only shared this with a couple people in my life, so I will share it now. On Halloween of last year, the verdict came out guilty. I knew what that meant. I also knew that I've been doing this a long time, and I did not know if I was up for it. I'll be really honest with you. This is a large brokerage. This is a burden, a job that I take very seriously. Okay, so I took till January 1 to decide whether I wanted to keep this position. That's a fact. I did not know if I was up for it. I didn't know. Oh, no. I've been doing this a long time. I've run very hard. I've run teams. I've built brokerages my whole life. I knew that this was going to tip our industry over a bit sideways. But anybody that does know me, that if I make the decision to stay in, I'm in all the way. I'm not in 90%. I'm not in 95%. Thank you for that. You also know I like to illustrate points with little stories sometimes. So there's been a study done on people that were going to jump out of a plane for the first time. They've all heard this. So what they did was 24 hours before they jumped out of the plane, they put them on a heart monitor. And every hour before that, even when they were sleeping, their heart rate continued to go up. What do you think happened when they moment to that heart rate monitor, they jumped out of the plane? You've heard the story too. It went back to complete normal. August 17th, you're jumping out of the plane. Your heart rate's going to go back to normal. We're going to figure it out. He and I, Marcia, we answer calls all day long. We're going to help you figure it out. We're going to hash this stuff out. Buyers want to buy and sellers want to sell, and agents are inserted into the equation. They've already been paying these commissions. It's nothing new. It's just how we're asking for it. So we're going to do, Charles Rutenberg Realty is going to do what we have always done. We're going to lead from the front. We're not going to watch and wonder what this office is doing. I want to hear it, but don't take offense if I don't give it a lot of credibility when you run to me and tell me that so-and-so brokerage is doing this and you need to do this too. We are all in on this for you. We're in it together. We're going to get through this. You remember our motto, we set the standard, okay? We are the standard of excellence. The industry is looking at us, whether you know that or not. They're looking, they may take their shots. Oh, you're a Rutenberg agent. Oh, I'm over here with the fancy people and we all drive certain cars and we're, no, they're watching us and they're jealous of us. We have been doing this for 25 years. We dominate the local market, and that's because we give you guys the freedom and flexibility to do your business the way you want to do it. We don't micromanage you. We will keep you safe. What I'm asking for you guys is a little trust and a little confidence that we're working on this on our end, okay? We'll see you guys all next time.